everyone. I am Dr. Betsy Scott here at the Family Institute. I serve on our child, adolescent, and family team. As many of you know, in 2024, the U.S. Surgeon General's office created a report called Parents Under Pressure, the U.S. Surgeon General's advisory on the mental health and well-being of parents. Upon reading this report, I began to think, what systemic concept have I learned that I think could help parents understand themselves, show up for themselves, and support themselves, as well as understand others, their loved ones, show up for their loved ones, and to support their loved ones. And this concept came to mind. And this is what I want to talk to you today about, is differentiation of self. If you were to Google differentiation of self, you will begin to see articles written about it on various psychology sites. One of the ones that I came across and I thought, wow, we all needed this in 2020. It was actually written in the middle of lockdown. This article called Differentiation is the Crucial Relationship Skill That You Need. It was written in lockdown by a clinical social worker, also a licensed marriage and family therapist from Israel. And he was quarantining with his family. And what he writes in this article is, out of all the systemic work he has done, that differentiation of self, or I'll call DOS for the rest of our time together, helped him the most during lockdown. It also changed his marriage, his practice, and key relationships in his life. Here's another article on choosingtherapy.com, published in 2023, and it was called Differentiation of Self, an Overview and Why It's Important in Relationships. Not only that, not only psychology websites, but take a look at this one. This is the Texas Assisted Living Association, and it used differentiation of self in its training for its employees. The training series was called Becoming a Great Senior Living Leader. So, what is this concept that I am talking about and want to share with you today? Well, first, you need to know it was created by a psychiatrist who then later turned systemic or family therapist. But in 1967, Murray Bowen shocked delegates at a national conference of family researchers. He actually set aside his expected didactic paper and he presented a description of his personal efforts to redefine himself and his family of origin. And out of this, he birthed this concept called differentiation of self. His rationale was this, that for himself, as a family therapist, he found that they usually have the very same problems in their own family that present in other families that they see professionally, and that they have a responsibility to define themselves and their own family if they're to function adequately in their professional work. So I'm here to talk to you about parents' levels of differentiation of self. But as you can see here, this concept is actually very important to clinicians as well. The definition of DOS that I'm providing for you today, it comes from a combination of teaching. I teach in the Masters of Science program in MFT, both online and in person, and it comes from my own clinical work and my own experience. It's really, a DOS is the ability to have a sense of being a solid self. That means really knowing who you are, being able to understand deeply what makes you you. But here are also some details that would contribute to it being a solid self. The ability to honor one's personal psychological values and goals, being aware of your unique patterns of feeling and thinking, resisting conforming to pressures from others to be something or to be different, and also the ability to accept advice to improve oneself, but I would also say feedback. The key is this, maintaining that while concurrently relating to or maintaining meaningful connection with, experiencing closeness with key people in the system that one inhabits. In summary, what I have found is DOS is multidimensional construct, which we will go over today, but it's also multi-generational. And it's the only concept of Murray Bowen's that involves what we call an intrapsychic component. It's the ability to, it's not solely systemic in the way that it's interpersonal, but we really have to think about what is our intrapersonal, so our inside ability to self-regulate, to differentiate between our thinking and feeling systems. But it also is an interpersonal ability to balance some of the things that we've talked about, autonomy, and relationship investment. Here are some other key terms that I wanted to mention that you might see in this presentation. Number one is pseudo-self. So pseudo-self versus solid flexible self. I want you to think of pseudo-self as is being lower differentiated or lower levels of DOS. This is essentially a self that we put on to function in the world, right? There's a sense of a false self, a pretend self, a borrowed or lent self, and it functions mostly in relationships in response to approval of others. This is contrasted with higher levels of DOS, which is to be a solid, flexible self, which we will go over how to even obtain this or attain this in our lives. But the other key terms I wanted to share with you are fusion with others and emotional cutoff. And for the rest of the presentation, you'll see FO and EC for these concepts. Essentially, I want you to think of low levels of DOS. They create what we call our intra-psychic sense of self is overwhelmed by an interpersonal environment. So much so for some people, they will fuse to get a sense of self, or they will cut off to maintain a sense of self. So, fusion with others looks like constantly accommodating, seeking acceptance or approval, sacrificing independence to submit to somebody else. High EC would be considered, and actually happens often in reaction to fusion with others, but it's the inability to be able to sustain intimate, emotional, maybe intense connections with people. It can be a sense of we're emphasizing autonomy here without a sense of togetherness or connection. You might see someone withdrawing. And so I want you to also think about intergenerational construct that I just, or concept here that I just introduced. And what we learn is the greater fusion between generations, the greater the likelihood that the following generations will cut off from each other as a response to the fusion. And then I position or IP. So this is really the idea of having a strong sense of who you are, and that comes within you. And it's never taken on by coercion from someone else, but it's a decision you make to become and be this person. We say a high I position means high responsibility, high accountability. The higher the I position, the lower the tendency to blame your own unhappiness or discomfort or failures on others. So, what's in the following slides, I'm not going to go over these in detail, but they are summary slides of what we call literature review, which is what has all the research shown us with differentiation of self. So, I have a summary slide that shows us in general, and then after this, I have what shows us in families. So, I'm going to pop these up here, and then I'm going to talk about them briefly, which is essentially DOS is negatively associated with anxiety. So the higher the levels of DOS, the lower the levels of anxiety. It's positively, though, associated with psychological well-being. So the higher your DOS, the higher your psychological well-being. Less differentiated people are more likely to cut off or fuse in response to stress. They are less flexible. They have a harder time remaining calm in interpersonal conflicts, and I would say resolving those conflicts. But higher differentiated people, they can better regulate their emotions. They're able to think clearly under stress and remain connected to other people's emotions when they are feeling stressed out. And then what we see is, again, high FO and high EC. It can be connected to impairment in judgment, social anxiety. It can also be a strong, again, predictor of anxiety disorders or psychological distress. But what about in families? What do we see in families? I'm going to pull up this slide so that we can see a summary of all the research literature that I have looked at. And I've tried to be really extensive with this, but of course, it's never fully exhaustive. But DOS in families in general is that lower levels of DOS is associated with more family conflict, with lower family functioning, and more what we call trait anxiety in a family. What that means is anxiety will be running the show in a family when there is low levels of DOS. But this is interesting. DOS and research has shown to mediate the relationship between stress events and psychological distress. So people who experience stress, if they're lower differentiated, this is more likely to lead to psychological distress. Okay. What we see in greater DOS is associated in young adults is associated with lower depression, lower anxiety. Some of the research has actually shown that the extent of a mother's capacity to regulate themselves emotionally is actually connected to higher child academic achievement and what we call pro-social behavior, behavior that leads them towards connection with others. But low DOS actually was when it frustrated a child's needs, like it got in the way of a child's psychological needs getting met. What the research shows is this results in what we call higher externalizing behaviors or higher acting out behaviors. So now I really wanted to move into something that it's more practical. Like for me as a clinician, what am I looking for and how do I help parents increase their levels of differentiation of self? But before we go on, just see the summary slide here that I want you to know, parents, you can greatly benefit from understanding your levels of DOS, as well as, and in addition to decreasing your stress and stress management. But if you are able to tend to DOS and find ways to manage your stress, you can be more effective in at least this is what literature tells us, in reducing your symptomology, but also your children's mental health symptomology. So what am I looking for when I'm meeting with families? And of course, this presentation is geared towards parents, but I'm actually looking at this in all parts of the system. Am I looking for people who have a sense of your own limits and the limits of others? Can you define yourselves from within, from who you are, rather than solely just adapting yourself to please other people, your family, your children? Do you have a clear understanding of your own beliefs, your own convictions, and can you communicate them in your system that you're a part of? Can you maintain like a relatively non-reactive presence with those who are reacting to you? Or I would say the inverse of that is, do you match those around you who are reacting to you in that way? Can you manage your own anxiety without projecting it onto people around you? Can you take distance from problems in your family and still consider yourself a good parent? Do you feel responsible constantly for other people's feelings or outcomes around you? And is there a sense of who you are outside of this problem in your family? Is there a sense of meaningful connection between you and your adolescence? Do you always see others as the problem? Do you always say what others want to hear? Do you lose yourself in your role as a parent or in your work? Do you demand things like compliments, praise, attention? And if you don't get those things, I would add, do you feel dysregulated? Do you seek to control others instead of controlling yourself? So now I want to give you 8 tips. And these are clinical tips that I've learned again through teaching, my own experience and my own personal experience on how to increase your levels of DOS as a parent. One thing I would say is to adopt an authoritative parenting style. And what I don't, this is contrasted to an authoritarian parenting style. This type of parenting style, which I will describe briefly, is in research points to the most beneficial to children. And so it's this idea of parents, can you set clear expectations and boundaries while being responsive and supportive of your child's needs and their independence? Parents, are you assertive but not intrusive? Can you use supportive discipline? Can you also encourage open communication? This quote here is sort of a dream that I have for parents, right? Is can they do all of these things? In the end, the last sentences are, can you manage your intense discomfort of another person who's disagreeing with you? This skill is extremely important during the adolescent stage. And can you do that without distancing yourself or always moving to accommodate this other person's view? And so the second one is I tell parents DOS implies movement. You have to think of increasing your levels of DOS along these two planes, right? Do you need to move along the spectrum of balancing togetherness and autonomy? Or do you need to learn to differentiate between your thinking and feeling systems? And what we're about to go through will help us figure out how to do that. But DOS means that we need to grow and evolve and change. Essentially, what it does is it will help us reduce our emotional reactivity and it will create greater interpersonal competence. Number three, understand this, that DOS, it is a multi-generational concept. It did not just develop out of nowhere, or it did not just develop within the last few years. And, in fact, the creator of DOS theorized this, that someone's level of DOS is determined by several factors, but multi-generationally relative to this conversation is it's connected to level of differentiation of one's parents. And I would add their parents' parents and their relationship with their parents. So we like to look back 3 generations to see patterns in families. I would say it's dependent on type of relationship child had with parents or the way someone resolves their own emotional attachment to their parents and how that's handled in young adulthood. But I would say if you have not engaged in what is called family of origin work, I would highly invite you to discuss that with your therapist or start going to a therapist to begin looking at levels of differentiation of self all throughout the generations to see how it has impacted how you see yourself, how you understand yourself, how you show up in the systems that you inhabit, but also how you parent. And then I would add this. This is a very important dynamic. I want you to think about embracing dialectical thinking. It means the ability to embrace what feel like two opposing things and that they can be true at the same time. I often find when I'm working with parents, they're stuck in all or nothing thinking or binary thinking, either or thinking. But maybe I can set boundaries and I can be loving. I can make space for myself and for my child. Their bids of independence, my children's bids, they're normal and healthy and they're hard. I can have a schedule, I can have a routine, and I can be flexible at the same time. So here are just some examples. And then understanding boundaries. One of the definitions that I heard of boundaries that sort of stayed with me and I kept pondering it was lack of boundaries equals betrayal of self. And so I began to think in DOS terms, and I thought, okay, if low DOS means a lower sense of self, then it would make sense to me that a lack of boundaries would come from lower DOS and that it would feel like you don't know who you are, or out of not knowing who you are, you're struggling with setting boundaries. So, what you need to do is increase your I position, right? So, increasing I position means thinking through the following things: understanding what I am, who I am, what I need, what I value, understanding what other family members of my family need, and understanding their roles outside of who I believe them to be or believe they should be. And I would say I am my own person and they are their own people. So what you're doing is you're helping them understand their I position as you begin to understand more of your I position. Kids do not need to be carbon copies of me. I don't need to fulfill my own unfulfilled hopes and dreams through my kids. I can honor my own autonomy and I can honor their autonomy, their individuation and their bids for independence. They don't have to feel threatening to me. And next, the last three are this. Number 6, avoid power dynamic struggles. I think getting into power dynamic struggles represents low levels of DOS. And lower levels of DOS can look like power with a scarcity mindset. It means that we imagine there's only so much of it, and I need to have it or you do. We are vying for it. One of us wins, one of us loses. One of us is right, one of us is wrong. But I actually find that if we can get out of power dynamic and struggles, it involves because they involved emotional reactivity. So if we work on DOS, we can reduce the amount of power struggles we get in, and we can actually value relationship over the need to be right. And that is one of the suggestions I would have when it has to do with power dynamic struggles. You are worth it. I value your relationship over needing to be right in this moment. And then I would talk to your therapist or start understanding the concept of repair. What does it look like to repair with your child when there has been an injury, an emotional injury? What does it look like to deliver what we call a parental therapeutic apology? And if you don't know what that is, definitely feel free to email me. My email is one of the last slides, and we can discuss that together. Be connected to yourself and to others. So what that looks like is similar to the I position, but it's really getting to know who you are outside of this work you do or outside of being a parent. What kind of partner or parent do you want to be? How well do you know yourself? I would add, what unfinished business do you have with your family that's impacting how you parent? And can you own your own stuff? Again, if you're not in therapy, I would suggest going to therapy and taking these steps. But a lot of parents I know aren't connected to other people. They are surviving and they have become very self-sufficient in this world. And so I would say, in order to increase your DUS, increase your connection to others. Who do you trust in your life? Who is your community, your people? Who can you rely on? Can people rely on you? How accessible are you? Can you ask for help when you need it? And last but not least is self-regulation and co-regulation. This is a very important one I talk all the time about with my families is every person in the family needs to understand how to self-regulate, but also co-regulate. So self-regulation, I do a lot of psychoeducation on the neurobiological impact of stress on our minds and bodies. I introduce this concept to parents to slow down, to be aware of what's happening to you emotionally. We talk about how emotions show up first in our bodies. And so we have to be able to be connected to our bodies. That's called interoception before we can actually name an emotion. So when you slow down, you can become more aware of these things that are happening to you and the whys behind them. I also help families slow down to mentalize with each other and if with themselves, but especially with their children. This means being able to look underneath a behavior and see what is the emotional mental state here instead of just focusing on the behavior. Other self-regulating tools is all the emotional psychoeducation. So that looks like understanding how to be specific with your emotions, how to literacy, how to learn more about how many emotions are out there. But I also do specific things with families. I help them understand the difference between guilt and shame. We talk about cultivating buried emotions or suppressed emotions and making space for new emotional experiences between us. And if you haven't been introduced to mindfulness, I would highly encourage you to look into this. DOS, viewed through this lens of mindfulness, is really helpful. It can help you have clarity and compassion and awareness of mind-body interactions. And so here's a definition that I got from an article in Clinical Psychology that just says this. Mindfulness helps us do this, create space between one's perception and one's response, ultimately making it possible to respond and interact more reflectively instead of reflexively. And grounded techniques. Again, talk about this with your therapist or call a therapist to understand what does it mean to be grounded. I help parents understand how to be grounded in the midst of feeling triggered and anxious and emotionally flooded so that they can attune to their child, so that they can offer support to their child. And then last but not least, co-regulation. I have a fun list here of activities that you can try with your family. And this helps reduce stress. It helps you feel connected. It helps your bodies enjoy this time together. And there's a favorite one that I bolded here. It's called the squish sandwich. But you can try these things. They're fun. So this is when we receive regulation from help from others, and it helps us calm down as well, not just the own tools that we have, but the family is a co-regulating tool. So these are the types of therapeutic modalities that can all help you increase your DOS. There is not a one type of therapy that will help you with this. I do a lot of work in the emotionally focused therapy realm, as well as all of the systemic therapy. And so you can't go wrong here. And then I just wanted to share in closing, just think of this as starting somewhere and taking a long range view. DUS is a spectrum. It can change, it can shift. You are never quite done increasing your DOS, but start somewhere. I just want to thank you for joining in at this presentation, and it was really great and such an honor to be able to teach you all about differentiation of self, something that's very near and dear to my heart.